Hello, everyone. My name is Tokiwa Smith. I'm principal of Tokiwa T Smith Consulting, and I want to welcome you to our Chat and Chew. The Chat and Chew is our virtual workshop series where each quarter we discuss an issue of racial inequity or systematic racism in education or philanthropy. And so this month, as we approach the holidays, I wanted to address literacy and reading because we know that's such an important issue in child's development. The literacy skills impact their ability to read, impact their ability to learn. And then when it comes to Black children, the importance of reading, as well as seeing characters that look like them in the book that they read. I remember throughout my educational journey, having so many books that didn't have characters that looked like me. And even though I loved to read, I dreaded reading those books. I remember Canterbury Tales in high school. It's like, who said we got to read this? I don't even know what they're saying. And so as we think about, as we go into the holidays, which is the perfect time to read, and thinking about a book that I read with my nephew and how he was so excited to read it because all the characters looked like him. And so whether your child is a good reader, still struggling, whether they're behind, we also know like reading is the foundation of your educational experience, as well as the importance of seeing people that look like them and what they read, whether it's a book, a graphic novel. And so our guest today is Mrs. Bunnie Hilliard. I'm so excited to have her because she's actually a fellow FAMU alumna. She's the owner of Brave and Kind Bookstores, which is an independent bookstore that I keep saying you specialize in children and youth books. But my friend was like, she got grown-up books too. And I'm like, I guess she didn't have grown-up books. I bought a cookbook from there. But she's a partner in my work with my nonprofit, with our literacy program, where we intentionally make sure that when we take books and community spaces, many communities with Black and Brown children, that the books have characters that look like them, or at least, what do they call it? An ensemble cast, where it's like multiracial.
Right.
And also that the books are from Black authors, because some of these white people trying to get our coins by writing books of Black characters. Like, y'all done got enough from us. Like, stop.
That's true.
And so that's why we're going to have this conversation and start last Chat and Chew of 2023 with the holidays and the kids being home on road trips or plane trips or train trips, however you choose to spend your holidays. The kids gonna have some downtime, and it's cold, so they may or may not go outside, depending where they are, depending, your weather aversion is. Because I'm from Miami, I don't do outside cold, like be inside. This is a good time for them to catch up on reading, and especially reading that they may not. I mean, of course, if your child is academically behind, it may be an opportunity to catch up, but we also want reading to be fun. And so the holidays are an opportunity for them to pick up their favorite book or introduce them to a book or graphic novel to read over the holidays. They'll have a 1 week over Thanksgiving, and maybe, depending on the school district, 2 to 3 weeks for that winter break between Christmas and New Year's.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's why we're ending the year with this conversation. So, Bunnie, I'm going to have a few conversations, and there'll be questions, and then there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions. And then, some questions may come up based on your answer. We're going to go ahead and get started. So tell us a little bit about your decision to open an independent bookstore that I still say it has a special emphasis on.
It definitely does.
Okay.
We are. So just to reintroduce myself a little bit, I'm so grateful that you invited me on to share. It's been my pleasure to work with you over these last years. I know that we have a shared mission of kind of celebrating and elevating Black children and literacy and stories and books and just elevating them, period. And so Brave and Kind Books is primarily a children's bookstore. Earlier you said bookstores. I was like, look at her prophesying on this these multiple locations that we don't have yet, but I'll take it. That's certainly, hopefully the next step on the next horizon. But right now we're in the Oakhurst neighborhood in Decatur, but also we have a very robust web shop, so we're able to offer books online and to people across the U.S. But specifically, we prioritize diversity in children's literature, and so we, of course, highlight books with main characters and stories by Black people and all people of color. And to your point, also an ensemble cast, so that when people come in, it is very obvious that they are in a place where it is most important to see books with diverse characters and stories and authors. So again, thank you so much for having me, fellow Rattler. We opened Brave and Kind. We decided to open Brave and Kind in 2018. But the very beginnings for Brave, as I'd like to call it, go back maybe to 2011 and 2012 when my daughter, who's now 15, was about 3 or 4, and we were really starting to encourage her to read independently and wanted to create some positive associations around learning to read, as opposed to just this thing that she had to do once you became of age. That felt more like, a job, a chore, something you had to do in school. I started a book club for her and a few of her friends. So they were 3 and 4. We would meet up monthly at different playgrounds or different bookstores and throw out our blanket and bring our favorite books. And they would all take turns reading aloud and sharing their snacks and just talking about books in a way from early on that felt like this fun thing to do. Because what's better than like books and friends and snacks, right? Mm-hmm. For me anyway. And so hopefully imparting that on her as well. But during that time, I found it very difficult to find stories that had main characters and stories that resonated with her outside of things that were of a historical nature, or of course about our African American icons, which I think is obviously so important to see and learn and share. But I think equally important for me and for us were to find books that had Black children that were just finding joy and riding their bikes and running for class president and doing those sorts of everyday things. So in 2018, after a hiatus from my corporate career, I was at a crossroads where I had to decide kind of what would be the next chapter, both literally and figuratively. And I asked myself, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And Brave and Kind Bookshop was the answer to that for me. At that time, diversity in children's literature was still a challenge. I think we've made a lot of progress in just, I would say, even the last 3 or 4 years. But I wanted a place, selfishly, I wanted a place where I could find and my friends could find books that would inspire them to be both brave and kind in a world that at that particular time we had a president that made that challenge for me even more important. I felt like if we could plant those seeds early on, which is why I chose a children's bookstore, though, to get to our very earliest readers, that the world is made more beautiful and stronger because of us, because of people that look like us, then maybe we did stand a chance of making America great again. So he said, but for real. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
That is so great. So that your answer prompted the question, because you were like, I wanted my 3-year-old to think about reading independently. How did that come in your head so young, right? Because we look at 3-year-olds, like their communication isn't that, a lot of things that aren't developing. But what made you think that far ahead to plant a seed that early as 3 to think about, one day you're going to read a book on your own? we will
Right.
always be here. Mhm.
Right. Well, I mean, I think I felt like I knew that my child, come heck or high water, was going to learn how to read and know how to read. And I think, moreover, for me, it was the stories that I wanted the seeds and the stories that I wanted her to know for herself and to seek for herself and to believe for herself. Of course, we were reading to them from the time for the time that she was in my belly, from the time I held her in my arms. I wanted her to be a strong reader because, what they teach us in school, reading is fundamental. Readers are leaders. Reader is an indicator of being successful. And so I felt certainly the more she knew, the better off she would be.
That's good. That is so great. So what are the various ways that parents, caregivers of Black children and teens can ensure that their teens' kids have access to books at home?
So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the public library. Obviously, those are places where we can go and find books for free, right? They all have, from the time they were little, we would be the first in the line at the bookstore, in the library for their free story times, and sign up for those events so that we can come and just experience those books and take some books home with us, and to just I don't know, to make that into a special thing that we did very early on so that they would believe that books were important, an important part of life for themselves. Of course, there's school libraries and the librarians that I have met over these years doing the work for the bookstore, and their ability to just really commune and engage with kids and provide reading that are a good fit for them and their age and I'll say reading level to a certain degree, but I feel like that's a separate conversation. And obviously local bookstores, right? You can certainly local bookstores and used local bookstores where you can find books at a fraction of the price. We carry in our bookstore something that's called ARCs. It stands for Advanced Reader Copies. And so the publishers will send us kind of preview copies of books so that we can read them or share them with the booksellers in the store and decide whether or not we want to carry them and share them. And so we offer those books for free because we can't sell them. So we collect them and we let folks know that if you're here shopping or if you just want to pop in and look through the ARCs that we have to see if something is interesting to you or you'd like to take it home and share it with your little ones, then you can do that as well. And then there's Libby, right? Libby is the free app that you get through the library where you can download ebooks and audiobooks and digital magazines and things of that nature. So I think that's a pretty good list. Do you have any to add, Tokiwa?
No, I can't think of anything. I downloaded a book on Libby.
Little Free Libraries was the other one.
Oh, yes. But they're so random. Like I have been looking for another space, but if you find them, and another thing we'll make a mention, like some of those little free libraries, I see like raggedy books in there. And I'm like, why y'all doing that? Like this is not the dumping ground for old books.
That's true. That is true.
Make sure it's in good condition. How is ripped and moldy and you donate it to a free library?
If you didn't want that book, then I don't want it either. That's true. That's how I decide which books I donate. If it's too raggedy for me to keep, it's too raggedy for me to share. So we just recycle that.
Yeah, I donate new books, but I'm like, this is for somebody. Yeah, and there are some nice books in the library too, but I've also seen like people like donate trash. I'm like, no, donate a book that you like to read.
Yeah, we do try to. So when we have our author events at the store, one of the options is to purchase and donate a book, and so we donate those books to little free libraries and to school libraries as well.
And so They can't be
Yeah,
tried.
they can. That's true.
Yeah. So do you think, and I debate this as an avid reader and purchasing books all the time, do you think that ebooks or physical books are better for teens and youth, or does it not matter as long as kids and teens have access to books and are reading?
Mhm. I personally prefer to hold a book in my hand and to flip the pages and to, I think of books. I'm an avid book collector. I have my TBR pile is growing daily, and I just like the look and feel. I like to hold books in my hand, but I think reading is reading, and especially for young people, I would not put any obstacles in the way of them, digesting the pages and the words, whether that be electronic or otherwise. Because it's more to me about the word count, about the about just expanding their vocabulary, expanding their knowledge of different stories and different you know um, cultures and environments and just stories. And so yeah, I think a book is a book, and audiobooks count for me too. So
Yeah, I know a lot of libraries have that read along, and
mhm.
it has been so clutch when I've had my nephew with me sometimes because I'm like, he need to read a book, but I don't want to read a book. Let me hand him this advice and do a read along,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So
So to your point, they have the devices in their hand. Why limit it? Yeah.
I know. I don't, it's not, I don't think it's preferable, but I'll take it really is what, because I actually, I have my 15-year-old and she loves to read, that's her jam. But then I also have an 11-year-old son, and he's more of a reluctant reader. I mean, he straight told me shouldn't even say this in public because I told him not to repeat that. He said, "Mommy, I don't like to read." And I was just like,
Your mommy owns a
I
bookstore.
don't,
Are you trying to take her out?
I own a whole bookstore. How are you going to be? He didn't say it in public. He said it at home, and maybe he just did it to hurt my feelings. I don't know. But whether he likes to read or not, it is a requirement in our house. So, to our conversation about what counts as reading, I know people are don't particularly prefer graphic novels. A lot of people are like against graphic novels, like that's not reading, but I don't agree with that either. He loves graphic novels, and if he can get excited about graphic novels, then yep, you know what, we're going to get that graphic novel and then the other 5 in the series, because at the end of the day, what I care about is that you're finding stories that you love, and that you're reading more.
And graphic novels have some great stories.
They really do. They really do.
Mm-hmm. So, what is the importance of Black children and teens having at least one book at home that is their own?
Yeah. I just think it's important. I think it sets a tone. It sets an example about what's important. A book with their name in it, a book that has an inscription inside of it from the person who gave it to them, from the librarian, from the caregiver, from the parent, from the friend who thought that was a story that they would enjoy or that should have. I talk a lot about having books for your home and your school and your home libraries as well. Another reason that I convinced myself that Brave and Kind Books was a good idea is that, I felt like if we were open just a day, as you're convincing yourself that you can become an entrepreneur and do this thing, whether people had books in their house whether we were open rather for a day, a month, or a year or 10 years, that people would have books in their homes, in their school libraries that they found and they purchased or someone gave them from Brave and Kind. So kind of it leaves an impression. I think books leave a legacy. We used to have this bookmark in the store that said, when you read a book as a child, it becomes a part of you in a way that no other reading in your whole life does. And I believe that, it's just, that's actually an old movie quote for one of my favorite movies. But I really believe that when you read a book, when you're very small, we can all think back to a book that we read as a child and the impact that it had on us, or just recall that story. So I think it's important.
Yeah, I can think of like I had Shel Silverstein books as a
Uh-huh.
child, and I
Yeah.
saw them. And then I can never say the name, but you had his daughter at your shop, the Monforo's
Oh,
daughter.
Mufaro's daughter.
Yeah, I remember that story as a child. I
Yeah.
don't know if I had the book or not, but
Mhm.
like you said, those stories from my childhood and teenage years and even young adulthood, it's like
Mhm.
you can see the stories, how they transition, or you think about them and have happy memories, or, all of those things, or, have you remember like that book was so good. I
Yeah.
stayed up all night, even though I had to go to work the next morning, like all of those things. Or even now that a lot of books are being adapted to movies, and that
Yeah.
is a good one. To
Yeah.
movies and series, right? Having people
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, the book was better," or like having that whole comparison. So books really are such part of the soundtrack
Yeah,
and stories of our lives.
for sure.
So do you think that reading at home helps kids improve their literacy, reading comprehension, and other skills?
Definitely. I mentioned that I have a reluctant reader at home. I'm gonna stop calling him that. I'm gonna think of something better to call him because I wanna speak something that feels a bit more positive, into even the way that I refer to his reading habits. But even aside from what the studies say about book count and reading lots of books, or how many books is it before you go to kindergarten, reading 1,000 books before you go off to kindergarten, and how that just expands your vocabulary. But it also it expands your ability to read. It expands your ability to understand because you're having conversations about these books. Hopefully it expands just your the way that you look at the world, because you're seeing it from different perspectives and having conversations about different scenarios that you may find yourself in, or that may allow you to just navigate the world as a child and even as an adult. We like to say in our house to stay caught up on your reading. I can definitely say, when my son is reading every day, as we have asked, I see a direct correlation to even the conversations that he and I have, and the words he decides to use in those conversations. And he'll maybe say a word that was from a book that we read earlier in the week, or that he read earlier in the week. And I'll, poke fun. Okay, I see that you're breaking out your SAT words, because he's only 11, so has not taken the SAT, but certainly expands your thinking, and expands your vocabulary, and expands your way of understanding what you're reading, and understanding the world around you, for sure.
So this leads another question I have that wasn't on the list, but when you talk about conversations about books, I have two questions concerning
Mhm.
that. Like, how do you get children talking about what they read, with you as a parent or caregiver? And then
Mhm.
secondly, this is something your store is really good at, and I see a lot of smaller, well, no, independent bookstores doing this, as well as libraries, but more so the independent bookstores having author events where there are discussions about books for children
Mhm.
and teens.
Mhm.
So how important is it to have the conversation? How do we start conversations with the children in our lives about books? And how
Mhm.
more important is it to take them to events where authors are
Mhm.
talking about books?
Mhm. So I would say, I think I think reading with them helps you to have those conversations about the book. I've noticed, even just in my own experience in parenting, when I say, go and read this book and tell me about what you read, because we do this thing, and it's a balance. We do this thing called five-finger retail. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's
Mm.
basically, kind of a way that you can you read, you say you got to read for 20 minutes or 20 pages is what I'm asking of him to stay caught up on his reading. And then after you do your, do that assignment, because it's just part of your homework or doing what you're doing every day, it's a way for you to explain what you've read. So, okay, you're going to say who the characters are and where were they and what was the problem and, what was the thing that they were trying to solve. And so he'll do that because it's a task. But if we read it together, as much as I can, I will get in bed with them at night when it's time for bed, and sometimes that's really the only time I get to spend with them because we're all doing all the things all day and we've got school and we've got practice and we've got, whatever is going on in our interests and the things that we have to take care of during the day. But after we've all gotten our baths and we've gotten in our pajamas and we've got those 15, 20 minutes before bed, I will get in bed with him and we're reading Spirit Glass by Roshani Chokshi. And he's reading it aloud to me and I'm reading some to him and I'm asking, what do you think about that? Or what do you think is going to happen next? Or how are you liking this book? Do you think it's fun or funny or, and just, having that time together, I think that opens the door for conversations. And we started doing that when they were really small, but I don't think if you haven't started when you were really small, it's never too late. So even my 15-year-old now will say, hey, would you come in my room? Would you, read with me for a little bit? And sometimes I'm just reading my own book in bed with them, just kind of modeling that reading is supposed to be relaxing and reading is supposed to be this thing that you can do at the end of the day. That's just, to unwind or to just, as part of your creative habit. I don't know if I answered the question.
You did answer the other question, but the importance of the book events where we have authors and conversations about books in public spaces.
So what I really like even more than, I noticed this even more recently because the conversations that we have at book events, and I'm going to work on this in the new year, for kids, I think should be a little different than the conversations that we have with adults. And because I want our book events, I feel like are really lean towards kids who already are lovers of books and stories. And they're already kids who, read ravenously and are coming to see their favorite author that has written a new book. As opposed to when the authors come to schools and they do this presentation to present to the kids to engage them and to kind of draw them into this story, it's really more, it's formatted for the kids to get excited about the book and the story and to ask them questions and to engage them. As opposed to an author just having a conversation about the book. They'll do a reading, they'll have a conversation with another author, they'll ask them questions about how they became a writer. And I think that's important too. But we did a book talk last week with a graphic novelist. His name is Gene Yang. He wrote Dragon Hoops and some other graphic novels, and the presentation that he did at the schools where he just showed them what he looked like as a kid, and he talked about being in the 6th grade, and he talked about his journey from writing from loving video games to now he's writing a book about video games. Like that's what gets kids excited and kind of because what I think it's important, obviously, to speak to those kids who are already lovers of books, but we want more kids to get excited about what it means to read and find books that are fun and that resonate with them. So, yes.
Okay, so that answer led to another question that I had is how do we get, and I don't know if like reluctant reader is a negative term, right? Because maybe selective, right? Because I can see.
I like it. I'm writing that down. A selective reader. He's a selective.
I can see the difference between books that I'm actually like love the topic, right? Because I'm reading them all the time versus books that I have to read, right? For whatever reason. But how do we get kids interested in reading and having them discover what their favorite genre is, right? Like mine is mysteries and sci-fi. And sometimes horror, if I can read it, during the day, like I can't
Yeah.
go to bed, or right.
Yeah.
So how do we get kids to explore books to find out what is their favorite thing to read and what they're interested in?
If I had it to do over again, I would have for my son, I'm ashamed to admit I didn't push the book club for my son as much as I did for my daughter. He was just a little bit more rambunctious and hard to have, at that age. He didn't want to sit still and read a book. I mean, we read books together, but that was just if we're going to the playground with books, if you think I'm going to get him to hang out on a blanket for more than 2 minutes to read, as opposed to going out and hanging out on the playground, it was just a harder sell for him. But I think it's something that in hindsight I would have come back to again, because I still think that there's opportunity to meet up with friends around books and reading, and kind of pair that with something else that the kids find interesting, just so that they stay engaged and reading different types of books each time you get together, and invite our friends over for just like fun and snacks, and we're going to play video games or basketball or music, or whatever the different interests may be, to see that we don't all have to like the same thing to be friends, right? We don't have to all like this just to read the same things, but we can find time to share stories and to make it more about the stories than the literacy. I think makes it feel less difficult.
So connecting it to other interests, getting them with their friends, like all of the things that we do, like as adults, like
right.
Me and my friends were like, girl, you picked up this book yet? Or, it was so good, or, I need a light read. What should I read? So having them start that conversation.
Yeah, you do that
at an early age. Yeah.
And so with, we used to do, and sometimes we still do, where it's like, okay, and now the book, the movie's coming out about the book, that the movie was after. And so let's read the book together first, and then we'll go and see the movie. And so then we get to say, what, the book was so much better than the movie, because it usually is. And that just starts a conversation. So I think to just find different entry points of things that are interesting, and just keep feeding them things that are that feel interesting to them. And I do think they come around.
Or we nurture that love of reading, right? Where reading is not just about what you need to do your homework, but reading is your way to learn what you want to do, to enjoy things, to learn new things, explore. So how do parents and caregivers ensure that their children read the books that are actually in their home?
I know.
Whether they're purchased from the bookstore and or checked out from the library.
How do we,
especially those library books? We got like 21 days, right?
Listen, how do we ensure that we read the 15 books we bought last month? Like, I need to sit down and read this before I buy another 3. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about reading with them as best we can. And sometimes, if I'm being honest, it's like I love being with my kids and spending time with them. And sometimes after a really long day, I really just want to get in my own bed and read my own book, or whatever I do to relax. But I think that finding time to connect with them over books, and setting aside time to do that as a family, and or as a part of connecting with the person that you're the caretaker, the time that they spend together, I think helps to ensure that they're also spending time reading. Also, if I'm being honest, I bribe my children, and I feel, I will give, with money, with extra time doing something that they might want to do on the weekend, that's outside of reading. And, I was talking to this publisher from one of the big publishers, and not publisher, she was a publicist from one of the big publishers, and, her son's an adult now. And she was saying that, you know, her son, when he was my son's age, he didn't really care, you know, like to read either. So she was in the same boat where it's like, okay, how's your mom going to be working from Penguin Random House? And you're, you know, I'm having to force you to read. But she was like, I don't care. I did it. I'd give him, you know, $1 for every book he read or $2 for every book he read. And, you know, and that kind of thing. And so, you know, by the time he became a teenager, or by the time he went off to college, he loves to read. And he's in a book club that he's been in since, you know, I don't know, the 12th grade or whatever. And they still meet up and they go on little, you know, road trips together, you know, him in this book club that he put together. And so, yes, bribe them. And read with them. I think, you know, set aside time to do that together. And yeah, do you guys have any ideas? Any other things you would add? Or any things that you have done that worked?
I kind of feel you, Bunnie. My son is a reader. My daughter, she not so much. She was a reader and then she got into film, and that's not what she wants to do as a career. So she'll read, but pretty much she's like, I don't really like to read. Like, you can't say that. Don't say that. But I think there's a point, and my son now, he's 19 and my daughter, she's 17. At some point, I kind of just let it be. Like, okay, you're not a reader like your mom is, and it's okay. Like, I kind of had to just like make my peace with that. But growing up, they saw it modeled by me. So she does have that foundation where it's like, well, yeah, we had deer time when we had to just stop. We all got in the living room and we all just grabbed a book, whatever it was. So I think at some point it's like you lay the foundation, and then it's like, you know what, they're going to be their own individual person, but they've got the foundation, and she'll read what she wants to read. But I think all the tips that you've given are solid and good ones.
Yeah. And I bet that they will both carry that with them, and whatever, you know, families that they have in the future for themselves, or in the little people that come into their lives. And I can guarantee with 100% that as adults, they will agree that reading is important, and that, you know, that part is what they'll carry with them.
And I have some older children and I have younger children. So it's almost like I have two different generations. And my older set, they were voracious readers. Okay. So they they were early readers, you know, reading before age 5 and things of that nature. But this next set of children, just, I don't know if by sheer just dynamics of there's more screen time available than my older set or what, but their appetite for reading is different. And also the type of reading they like to do is different. So they're into the graphic novels. And I was reluctant at first to kind of allow that to count as literature for a while, until I finally realized that this is just what they like. And so I went with it. And I noticed that a lot of the like mid-grade books, for instance, that my older children read, they're now the graphic novel versions. And so since they're in series, I'm like, okay, well, let's just get a chunk of them, and at least they're reading. And so I kind of just had to kind of get over myself and get out of the way when it came to that. And also I noticed that if a child is not showing interest in reading directly, I noticed that story writing and writing your own stories, that might be an in, because a lot of times I'm like, okay, well, let's create some stories. Let's because we participated in NaNoWriMo. I don't know if you're familiar with National Writing Month. And so it was through that experience over like the last few years that I just started to realize you guys are storytellers. So if you're a storyteller, then you are a reader. You're just kind of like on the other side of it, more like authorship. So I'm like, well, what can I do to use that as an in? And then so it's like, oh, your storyline reminds me of this book I read this one time. Maybe you're interested in that. And then I'll pull it up for them and tell them the synopsis and everything. Be like, okay, and so we'll try to bring it in that way from another angle. So I'm trying to be creative as I can.
Yeah. I think that's what it calls for us to just continue to be creative until, to your point, they just age out and we have to move on. What are your thoughts Tokiwa and group, just about literacy versus storytelling? I think, obviously it's important that they learn the basics of reading so that we can even get into the storytelling. So I don't know that it's a versus or in addition to or the combination.
I feel like it's a combination. I was just thinking about Erin talking about having her children write, right? And saying like, if they're really good at writing, that's the future authors who are going to create books for future generations to read, right?
Yep.
And so also I feel like storytelling is so important in our culture.
Yeah.
No, we can tell a story, right? Okay. And so I think it's one of those things that when we have a balance of them telling stories as well as reading stories, I think it's just as in other things in their lives, like video games, or we're teaching them not just to be consumers, but creators, right? And so I do think that if your child is interested in writing or telling stories, my niece was working on a book last year. I have to see if she picked it back up. And I thought it was like outrageous, like, what is girl writing about? But she's 8. She was 8 at the time, and that's where her mind goes, right? So I can't knock her story. And so I think, to me, it's just a delicate balance of when we see the kid that wants to tell stories and wants to write, they're becoming creators of the content that other people will consume.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think, I keep talking about the stories that we tell ourselves, right? As we're talking specifically about Black children versus, the stories that the world may try to tell us or our kids about, who they are or who they can be in the world. And just gathering, I think that's, that felt like the most important thing, is to gather those stories and plant those seeds really early, from the words and the first pictures that they were seeing of themselves, and what those stories were about and what they were sharing, because it did impart, early on in them that this is who I am, this is who I can be, this is who the world, sees me as, and certainly began to be conversation starters for us on different topics about life.
Yeah, which is a good transition to my last question before we, have any more thoughts or questions. How important is it for teens, kids, to read books, short stories, and graphic novels with main characters that are Black?
Yeah, it's important, right? When I was a kid, Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary were like all the rage, right? I made a beeline to the Junie B. Jones collection in the library because I felt like, she was a little girl like me. She was a little subversive, kind of, funny and smart like me, but also she wasn't like me. She didn't look anything like me. And so I remember my mom told me this story about when I was a little girl, that I asked her if you had to be white to be in books or on television, if that was a prerequisite. I didn't use that word, but do you have to be white to be on TV or in books? And of course, the answer was no, but that's what the impact of seeing those stories and not my stories on the shelves and on display in the library. And I didn't grow up with a lot of books in my home that I can remember. I remember, going to the library, but, not like my kids, obviously now, where, there is the bookstore and there is the library. And they have, lots of books in their rooms, whether they're reading them or not. They are, stacked up in their room. And so, nothing has been better or more affirming to our mission at Brave and Kind as a bookseller than seeing a child come in and pick up a book that made them laugh or smile or cry or whatever, as it affirmed them. A story that doesn't necessarily highlight trauma or the trauma associated with what it means to be Black in America or racism, but just Black kids, a face that looks like theirs. That's like they're riding their bikes and they're solving a mystery and they're, having their first kiss in this book that they, open, that has a face and a story that looks like them. I think it's so important.
Yeah, you have a book in the store, and I meant to read it before I put it to the library, but it's like these two kids, they're siblings, and they're using their imagination during a sleepover, right? And I feel like that's something that's so important for our children, because they have to deal with, the harsh reality of what is Black. And sometimes they're just not allowed to be children, right? And have that experience and seeing children being children. Aaron, go ahead.
That was actually with my oldest son. He's now 16. It was one of my largest issues finding literature for him when he was growing up. It's because all the stories were so ingrained and embedded in our experience here in America, which is not always the best. I found there just weren't any books about young, Black boys that represented just an everyday experience. And even now, I'm seeing more and more children's literature come on board that speaks to that, but not directly geared towards boys. So I really want to know if you have any suggestions in regards to that, because not that books are gendered or anything, but it's just, stories about young African-American boys specifically.
I agree. I completely agree. It continues to be a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, there are some out there, but they are sparingly. And I noticed, actually I was with an author today, actually at North Clayton Middle School. His name is H.D. Hunter, and he's written a series called Futureland. And it's a kind of science fantasy about, his family has this amusement park that is kind of magical and goes to different places across the world or anything. So he writes books like that. But what I find in having conversations with the authors in these different events and listening to them share their stories about even what the publishers will let them write, or how they will edit their books to include these types of things that they did not necessarily intend to be their story, because they feel like that makes it more relatable, right? But the people that are telling them that it's more relatable are not people that look like them. So, they're having to edit these things into their stories in order for them to bring them on and to sell their books. I talk, to Nick Stone specifically, who mentioned in all of the books that she's written, only the ones that, that are the hardest for her to write are the ones that get the most notoriety. But the ones that she wants to write about just love and friendship and things of that nature are the harder sell for her to get into the hands of publishers and readers. And so, I'm always trying to put together lists of books that are just about joy. But yeah, it's still a challenge.
It's like they're determining what we will buy, when it's like you can't dictate that.
Right. And always who's in the room when we're making when you're making these decisions. I find if it's just the one, author who has to fight tooth and nail to tell their story the way they want to tell it, and then a room full of, non-Black people that are pushing this decision along, I find it, that's kind of how the story gets told. And it turns them off. It turns our young people off, because, reading is supposed to be, in some ways an escape from, or a journey. And when I say escape, not necessarily escape from reality, but, you get to travel to different places. You get to, they call it windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. You get to see things from different perspectives, or maybe you get to hold up a mirror and see an experience that mirrors your own. But yeah, I can, even with my own kids, I remember there's a book called Blended. We read that. It's Sharon Draper. And, you know, it's a story about a blended family. And she's like, she was such a great book. It was riveting. It was, you know, preteen. So just juicy enough to not be a young adult a book. And then at the end, her brother randomly gets shot out of nowhere. And she's like, this just didn't even belong in the story. Like, why did they have to do that? And I'm just thinking, well, I don't know why they had to do that. But yeah.
The bias about what our experience is.
Right. And I love Sharon Draper. So don't, you know, take that as any knock on her at all, because she's a phenomenal writer. But, you know, to our point.
No, it's what you said. They who's in the room making decisions, just like in television, right? Like people who don't look like us, who have assumptions about our experiences and not realizing that there is a diversity of experiences. People can go their whole lives without being shot. I ain't never been shot. You know, you know, we can just have regular tragedy, right? Like family dies. Doesn't have to be this, you know, thing. Or, you know, yes, we do have experiences where we have to adapt, or, you know, but not everything about Black experience is a struggle, right? You know, there's a challenge because of institutional racism and all that kind of stuff. But,
yeah,
you know, the struggle, like, sometimes we are okay. Like, we're just going through living life and just dealing with what the hands that we're dealt. But it's not always crack addict, daddy in jail, you know, like all of those storylines, right? That people want to say. It's not always like he got out of the hood because he played the football. Maybe his circumstances changed. He was smart, right? Like,
you know, maybe his mama bribed him into reading every day, and then, you know.
You know, just one of those things that we have a diversity of experiences, and we want to see ourselves in all of those diversity of experiences that we experience, whether it is mirroring our own experiences, whether it's a reminder of like how we can, you know, overcome in spite of, whereas it's just like fun and future. Like my favorite author is Walter Mosley, and I love it because all of his stories like take me away, whether it's their sci-fi, whether it's looking back into the past, and some of his characters I definitely cannot relate to because I'm not a Black man into all the shenanigans and risking my life, but it's fun, right, to see in my head, right? And even with like Devil in the Blue Dress, every time I read an Easy Riley mystery, I see Donald Cheadle in my head. Right? So
I love that.
He's forever mouse. Oh, go ahead, Erin.
I had one more comment, and then we're gonna have to leave out. And I really thank you, Bunnie, for your time. This was excellent. But you know how, like with classic literature, what we call and consider classic literature, which is usually from a Western lens, right? How a lot of it doesn't always age well. Well, I've noticed with, like I said, because I have the older set and the younger set, and you know, my own age, what I thought was cutting edge, good African-American literature to give to my children, I'm starting to even notice some of that doesn't necessarily age well in regards to like my children and I growing up so differently. So like there was this book that we read, it was a picture book called Getting Through Thursday or something like that, right? Wasn't anything wrong with the book when I read it like almost 20 years ago. And now that I read it and I'm reading it to my children, they can't understand the concepts in the book because we live in the suburbs and we're from Chicago and now we live in Atlanta. Like it was just like a lot of just like I had to explain so many parts because our lives look so different from when I was reading this book, not understanding everything. Do you find that to be the case too? Like with some of the what we thought was, oh, at least we have these books. We didn't have that many, but some of them are not aging well either. As far as being able to be relatable for the youth.
So many things have. I don't know. Look, I've written down this Getting Through Thursday because I want to check that out. But obviously, so many things have changed in these decades of just about how we communicate with one another. And to your point, living in the suburbs versus growing up in the city, and the things that were safe and fun then, as versus now. But even further back, I feel like the themes should still ring true. Love and loss, or the hero's story, or those kinds of things. Those universal themes should still ring true. But I'm having difficulty thinking of a book that that I read then that would not feel relevant, or have this be able to have the same conversation now, and pull out the themes that feel important to the story. How about you, Tokiwa?
I can't think of any books because, like you said, I can't think of too many books, especially in my early childhood, that had characters that look like me. And so when I started reading on my own, I remember liking sci-fi and mysteries, and being exposed to like Eleanor Taylor Bland, all of those things. And Terry McMillan, which reading, but but I think my attraction was these are stories about Black women, right? Now that I look back, I'm like, I shouldn't have looked at that story, and them Black women were going through it. Like, I don't know about that, but the whole excitement of seeing yourself in a book, like this is a book about a Black woman, and so being excited about those things, and still hoping that we do have those more diversity, so kids can see that and be excited, and don't look 20 some years, 30 some years later, but like, that book was not the business.
Right.